I end up selling like a $7,000 car for $700 so that I can buy enough pills to overdose. Because I had figured that overdosing was the most painless way to end the suffering. And I was also delusional enough to think that like me ending my life would be a relief to everyone else around me, right? Like they wouldn't have the burden that is me or whatever, right?
It's about that time, but it ain't last year.
Welcome back to another episode of the Odd or God Pod, where we talk about sobriety, spirituality, everything in between. This week, very special episode. We've got Danny joining us. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, man, Danny Hapteas. I'm excited to be here, and I have this tendency. We go smoke cigars every Wednesday night, and a lot of times we just like shoot the shit on a bunch of random stuff. So this seems like a regular Wednesday night conversation. I'm looking forward to see where this goes.
I love that. That's the thing. We're gonna get you cooking,
Yeah.
and then wherever you take us, that's where we go.
Fuck yeah!
Love that.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, love that. We want to get you down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And guys, super quick for those of you watching on YouTube, you may notice where are these guys at? In our new studio. Thanks to our sponsor, Plugged In Recovery, we have a permanent spot. Haven't quite figured out exactly what we're going to do with it yet, but we're excited. Danny's our inaugural guest. And it's great. Shout out to Carlos, Alexa behind the camera. Let's just get into it, man. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, like what it was like and, what happened and what it's like now.
Yeah. So I grew up in like I wouldn't say regular household, but nothing like bad, right? So like my parents immigrated here from Ethiopia. And then part of what they did when I was a kid was they like sponsored people to come over.
Were you born here?
Yeah, I was born in Phoenix. Right?
Okay.
I've lived my entire life in Phoenix.
First generation.
Yeah,
American.
First generation, 100%. So all the stuff that comes with that, right? Like the parents that are focused on education and like strict, and like I had to sneak out in high school in order to go like hang out and party and stuff, like all of that stuff that came with it, right? And so they sponsored a bunch of people to come because like it's hard to get to America if you're not born here. Like it's super fucking hard. You have to like win a lottery, right? And like think about how many times you've played the lottery and haven't won a damn thing. Like it's a lottery to get a green card. But if you have someone sponsoring you, it's easier. So my parents would sponsor all these people to come live with us. So I counted it one day, between the age of 3 and 16, we had like 12 people come live with us for like a year or multiple years. And then most of them like left because they were, in their 20s and had lives to start. And I never saw them again, right? And so like, whatever, not a big deal, but like that was kind of my household growing up, right? And so I found like my place freshman year when I joined the basketball team. Like I was good at basketball, right? And so like that came with this like identity, sense of belonging, all this kind of stuff. And like I loved that feeling. I start like sneaking out and partying in high school, waking up in bathtubs or like the side of houses, not really thinking anything of it because it's Saturday and Sunday and I'm just partying, like not a big deal. During the week, I'm fine. Senior year, I start smoking weed before school, but it's like the last semester, not a big deal anymore. Then I go to Tucson to go to college and I join a fraternity, which was random. But I joined this fraternity and they're like, hey, you're going to be the only person that we allow to sell cocaine in the house. And I'm just like, perfect, dude. That's a monopoly. It's a pool party season. And a bunch of people need a lot of stuff to help them like party throughout the day, right? And so I start doing that. I can't sell stuff without doing stuff. That like fast forwards into me trying I was like one of those I'll try anything kind of people. So I try literally anything I've never done. It's because I've never had an opportunity to do it, right? And so that ends up with opiates. Towards the end of it, I'm like in my room playing Call of Duty 24/7. I have the same pair of like sweatpants or basketball shorts with like the burn hole in the crotch from like nodding out. I'm selling weed. And I realized that like I don't talk to anybody, right? I'm like super isolated. And I'm finally like, I remember that first time that I realized that I was physically dependent on opiates in order for me to like not withdraw. And like there was a voice deep inside of me that was like, oh, you're screwed. Like you're absolutely screwed. And like, I just did what I had to do in order to like make myself be well. Right. And so I end up moving back home with my parents, like any college graduate does, you know. They kick me out in this like super enabling way. They get me an apartment. They pay for the first like 2 months of that apartment. They take a trip out of the country. And I'm working a full-time job. I should be able to like, you know, live, right? Pay my bills and go to work and pay rent and all that kind of stuff. I don't do any of those things. I need to put something in my body in order for me to feel like I can navigate the world. If I don't feel okay. And so everything else is secondary to that, right? So like food is secondary to that. Paying my phone bill is secondary to that. Going to work is secondary to that. Maintaining relationships with my family is secondary to that. To the point where I pawn everything that I own. And I'm so miserable at this point, and I've tried to quit and I've tried to stop. And I can't think of anything that is possible to like allow me to live a life like one of these millions of normal people that I see every day. And so I come to this like logical conclusion that the only way for me to end my suffering is for me to end my life, right? It's like I have failed at being a human, and that's okay. Like I've come to accept that. And so I take a walk down to the Circle K that's right by my house. I grab a 44-ounce Thirst Buster, a Black and Mild, and a Phoenix New Times, and I get back to my apartment. At this point, I have an eviction notice on my door that says I have like 5 days left until the sheriffs or marshals or whoever does evictions comes over. I don't have a job anymore because I haven't shown up in 7 days because I've been withdrawing and I can't get out of bed. My phone is off probably because I can't pay that bill. And the only thing that I have of value is a car. I had a 2003 Honda Civic, and this is in 2011.
Those were cool back then.
I loved that car.
VTEC?
No, it was just like a regular ass Honda Civic. Dude. I was just like, I didn't put a spoiler on it or no like loud whatever muffler or nothing like that. But I got it brand new when I was 16. Like I was spoiled. You know what I mean? Like now looking back at it, I was spoiled. And so my car didn't have brakes. So like I would stop with the e-brake or like make an unscheduled right turn, you know, if I was going too fast. But like, I got the brakes fixed, whatever. Like the car's the only thing I have of value, right? And so I'm looking in the New Times, and it's like cars wanted, running or not, titled or not, cash today. And I was like, that's what I need. I need cash. I need it today. And so I end up selling like a $7,000 car for $700 so that I can buy enough pills to overdose. Because I had figured that overdosing was the most painless way to end the suffering. And I was also delusional enough to think that like me ending my life would be a relief to everyone else around me, right? Like they wouldn't have the burden that is me or whatever, right? And so I do that, and I take 2 steps out of this Motel 6 room, and I get a phone call from someone I hadn't talked to in like 6 months. And he's like, hey, do you have any Xanax on you? It was my old roommate who had stolen an iPod from, and so we hadn't talked since then.
What pills did you pick up?
Xanax and Percocets. I was like, I'm going to mix them in order to like overdose. That was the game plan, right? And so I write the suicide note. I go pick up the pills. And then I get the phone call. And I'm like, yeah, I actually just picked up some Xanax, which was weird because I hadn't had any Xanax in my possession in like a year, right? And so I'm like, yeah, I just picked some up. If you meet me here, I'll go ahead and sell you some. Which like, it took me like 10 years to realize this, but like, how ironic is it that I'm planning on ending my life within the next 48 hours? Like, what is the point of me selling any of the... That's actually counter to my goal. Like, it's the opposite of my goal, right? But for whatever reason, I was like, yep, I'll sell you half of them. And so I sell him half. I take the next half, get my stomach pumped, go to detox, leave. I'm at the apartment for a couple of days, and then I finally end up in a treatment center, man. And I don't really know what I expected getting into there, right? Like, I thought I was just like going to go there, and then like 30 days later, I'd be out and I'd be good. Right? Like, I didn't know what happened inside of it.
Dude, I literally thought that too.
Yeah?
I was just like, oh, I'm fine now.
Did you guys have did you have weird experiences? Like when I got to treatment, there's people like holding signs and stuffed animals and giving me hugs. And I was like, this is odd.
No,
right?
I went to rehab in COVID.
Oh,
so it was just like complete isolated lockdown.
I am so like, I don't know how anyone got sober during COVID. I couldn't imagine. Like I needed people around me who had similar experiences who I can like share that with, right? Like that's one of the first things when the first meeting I ever went to, that was the biggest thing that stuck out to me was, it was like this 300 person meeting. And like everybody with 30 days or less stand up. And I see like 40 people standing up. And I'm just like, oh man, maybe some other people do get it. Cause like, I don't know, you guys probably felt the same way. Like before I get sober, I feel so alone. I feel so like isolated. I feel like nobody understands and nobody can relate. And then I show up somewhere and everyone's like, yeah, man, me too. Welcome.
Yeah,
You're part of the club.
Yeah, like I remember like the first conversation I had with somebody about like meth psychosis, and I was just like, oh, like, this is like something that happens to everybody who doesn't sleep for 10 days.
Yeah, like if someone says shadow people and you immediately know what they mean.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Which is like funny because I'll have conversations, like I work like a corporate job now, and like I'll have conversations at work, and like in my head I'm just like, oh man, if you guys only knew. Right. Like if you only knew.
It's like everyone's like telling stories, you're like, dog.
Yeah, it's like I don't want to let any of my stories out at all, right? I got to admit to maintain. You guys give me a company credit card. Like I don't want you to know this about my past. No, so like I don't know, man. I go to treatment and like, you know, like they're giving me hugs and there's people holding like stuffed animals. I'm like, this place is weird, but like I don't really have shit going for me out there, so whatever. And then my counselor comes in and I remember vividly sitting in that room, and I was in there for like 5 minutes before she walked in. And in my head, I was like, great, you're going to teach me something you learned in some book, like a textbook. I don't care about your academic research that you did and your thesis and all that. Like, what do you know about living life the way that I had to live it? Right? And then she walks in and she's like, hey, my name's so-and-so, and I've been sober for 6 years. And all of a sudden, like I cared about what she had to say. And so like that place was great. I didn't really do anything they said. I ended up smoking heroin for the first time in treatment in there, and then leaving. And I remember this dude, Ben from New Mexico. I had met him 48 hours before. I get kicked out. He waits for me to pack all my stuff, takes me to his apartment or his sober living house, makes me a sandwich, hands me a packet of sober living houses to call. And he's like, hey man, listen, go down this list, call them, tell them that you just got out of treatment. You don't have any money. You don't have anywhere to go. You're looking to stay sober, and you promise that you'll pay them as soon as you get a job, and you'll start looking right away. And I was like, Ben, I've run a lot of scams in my day, and that sounds like the worst one I've ever heard of in my life. And I end up calling one, and hey, man, I just got out of treatment. I have nowhere to go. Say the same thing he says. And the guy's like, all right, cool. Like, if you can get here by 4, we got a bed for you. And like, I go there, I get there by 4. They got a bed for me. And that's when I finally started like listening to other people and taking suggestions. And like, here's like the best, like I could talk for hours about like what it was like. Here's the best way I can summarize it. I was an absolute slave. Like at some point when I started, it was a choice. It felt like a choice. It felt like, oh, I want to have fun, or I want to enhance this experience, or I wonder what going to the movies high would be like, or whatever. Right. And then at some point, I don't know exactly when, I knew that I was a slave. I knew that this thing had me mastered. And, you know, what I realized is I wasn't even really just a slave to like drugs and alcohol. I had this thing inside of me that needed something external in order for me to feel okay. So I found it initially in like drugs and alcohol, but that could come from affection. That could come from attention. That can come from money and status and gambling and food and shopping and all of these other things. I need something outside of myself because I don't feel good in my own skin. I don't feel comfortable in my own skin. And so, you know, like, thankfully, I guess, I got to a place where life was so miserable that I wrote a suicide note and planned on carrying it out. And I say thankfully because like my life is so good today. Like externally, it looks amazing, but like internally, it feels amazing. And that being aligned is super cool, right? And like, I really got that through listening to other people who also felt like the only way to end their suffering was for them to end their life, but they looked like they were happy. And so I'm like, all right, what did you guys do? And then I just did those things, right? And they like steps, find a connection with God, which was interesting because like I didn't believe in God when I got sober, right? And like that was a process, right? That was a process of like being willing and open-minded to having some new experience and trusting that other people were giving me suggestions because they wanted me to experience the same like level of joy and happiness that they experience, which makes sense because I had nothing to offer them, right? Like I used to pray that like I would hope that my identity got stolen because like maybe that could help my credit score, you know what I mean? And then I bought a house 2 years ago, and they have to run your credit, obviously, and it was like an 800 something. I was like, that's amazing. right? Like I was super, like I care about my credit score nowadays. Like, I don't know, man. I don't know that I'm able to encompass the impact that being sober has had on my life. Except to say that like, I feel like I get to experience freedom today, right? And like freedom goes way beyond passing a drug test, right? Freedom is perfect. I woke up this morning at 9:30. I work a normal like 9 to 5 job. I usually get into the office at 9. I usually start my day at like 8:15. I woke up at 9:30 and I missed a meeting. But I got ready real quick and I headed to the office and I got there at 10. And at the end of the day, I was talking to my director and he was like, "Oh, I didn't even know you were here today, this morning. Like, I felt like I walked by like at 9:30 and I didn't see you." And I was like, "Yeah, it's because I got in at 10 today." And he was like, "Oh man." I was like, "Yeah, I woke up at 9:30." He's like, "Oh, that's crazy." And like, I don't have this fear of like having that conversation. And I'm the type of person where like, he's not worried about me either. Right. And so like, I have this freedom of like, I'll give you another example. I was in a meeting a week ago and I'm sitting there and this guy walks up to me and he taps me on the leg and he's like, "Hey man, can I talk to you outside real quick?" I'm like, "Okay." And I walk outside to go talk to him. And I noticed that before he started saying any words, I was like pinging for the feelings that I had. And I noticed there was nothing there. There wasn't any fear. There wasn't a worry about what is he going to say.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah, like did I do something, or is he going to say something that's going to make me uncomfortable, or did I? There was nothing. I was just like, oh, I'm interested in what he's about to say. Like that's it, right? I got a 3-year-old nephew and an 18-month-old nephew, and like they absolutely love hanging out with me. You know what I mean? Like they like my nephew, my 3-year-old. I got him this like Lego set or whatever, and my sister-in-law sent me a text like a week after my nephew's birthday, and was like, "Oh, he loves this so much, and he remembered who gave it to him," and like he gets super excited to see me, right? Like I wasn't the type of person to, you know, the walk, like the old, like you're getting loaded and like you go have Thanksgiving at your family's house.
From the car to the front door?
Or not even that, just like I'm inside, right? And I've said hello to all the family members and stuff. And then I'm like, oh, I got to go take a walk, right?
Oh, the walk.
Oh, we forgot sugar? I'll go to the store and get it. I'll go. I'll be the one. I'll volunteer, right? Because I need to get out of the house in order to put something in my body in order to talk to the family, right? And now, like, I look forward to family vacations. You know, I mean, we spent like a week in Denver and had the time of my life. You know, and then like tonight when I go home, like when I get ready to go to bed, I'm gonna lay in bed, and then I'm gonna like play some YouTube videos because that's typically how I go to sleep, and my head will be quiet, and like I know that I'm good. Like I know that I'm good, regardless of what's going on around me. I know that I'm good. And that's how I am today. Like I've been sober for 12 years and like, it hasn't always been like that, right? There's been ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs, right? Today, at least, I know that like everything is fine. Probably because like I'm on a bit of a winning streak right now. So
there you go.
Yeah. No, life is like really freaking good right now.
That's awesome, man. And it's like, it's always like cool, like hearing everybody's like where they're at. Right, like people in their first year of sobriety, people in their 12th year of sobriety, and like just like find, like you can always find some common ground with like everyone's story, and that's like super cool, man. I did want to ask you a question that's kind of like off the cuff, not necessarily recovery related, but it's like I feel like it'll start like a good wormhole.
Sure.
And this is actually from a guy from one of our sponsors for the pod. He actually asked me to ask this. And that's just, what's like a piece of literature that's been super like prevalent in your life, or like a piece of literature that's made an impact?
This might take up the rest of the time. There's several, and I'll just list them off in the order that I think of them. One is a book called Crucial Conversations. It's all about having challenging conversations and creating the safety in order to be able to have that conversation, right? So like, if you want someone to be vulnerable with you, you have to make them feel safe enough to be vulnerable with you. So that's one of them. Another one is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Like one of the best books around like building a relationship and like how to work with other people. The 4 Agreements, because I tend to take things personally and I tend to always assume the worst. And that's been a really good book. Saint Surfer and CEO is also really good in terms of just like mindset stuff. I read a lot of like nonfiction books, like developmental type stuff, because like I want to be able to apply stuff. The only other book that's like fiction, I think, is 1984. It's my favorite book. And
good old Orwell.
yeah, it's an amazing book, and you can kind of like see that. Like I work in like analytics, and part of what I do is like all of our web analytics. And so we try to find out everything about a person that's navigating our website and like follow them around. Yeah. And it's very like Big Brother-ish a little bit. But no, I absolutely love that book. But yeah, those other four are like the first ones I can think of in terms of like mindset, how do I approach the world? And like I'm on this like constant path of self-development, improvement, whatever. The book I'm reading right now is called Never Split the Difference. So it's about like negotiations and how to negotiate more effectively. And so, yeah, I also have like, I have a bookshelf with like 1, 2, 3, 4 levels, and it's all filled. So there's probably like, I don't know, let's call it like 80 books on there. There's like 30 of those books that have a bookmark in them. I don't do like the read from front to back. Like I read something for a little bit, and then I get interested in something else. So I go to that, and I get interested in something else, and I go to that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but
no, that's good. Yeah. That was cool. I kind of didn't really have an expectation as far as like what that answer would be. Something also that I kind of thought of is like maybe this would be something that's kind of we can dig our teeth into, like a quote maybe. Like what's like a quote or an adage that's been impactful? Yeah,
so 2 things real quick. One, just to go back, one book I forgot to mention, The Celestine Prophecy. I've only read like 40% of it, but my entire conception of what I've like believe God is came from that book, right? Like that's the thing that allowed me to put it into words. In terms of quote, my favorite quote of all time is an Eleanor Roosevelt quote. It's great minds discuss ideas, small minds discuss great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, small minds discuss people. And like that's one thing that so it's interesting, man. Like I got sober at 23, right? And you ask anybody I don't think this is unique to like the recovery community. I think it's just everybody in that like age range. It's like kind of like high school all over again, right? You have like your cliques and image and all that, like there's gossip and all that kind of stuff. And I successfully avoided all of that stuff because I don't really care about talking about people if those people are not in the room, right? Like no one should be nervous that I'm going to say something about you when you're not there that I wouldn't say to you directly, right? And like in my head, that's just called integrity, right? It's a very simple thing. But like, it's saved me a lot of heartache and like challenge in the past because I don't like engage in those type of conversations, right? And like the other quote that I really love is if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, right? Like I'm always seeking experience from people who have more experience than I do. And the reality is like every single person in the world has more experience than me in something. And so there's something that I could take from them that I can like use to learn and grow. Like the chance of meeting someone is so slim that I'm probably meeting them for a reason.
Right. That's good, man. Kind of to circle back to your story too, this is like a question that kind of popped out. So like when you were growing up, you were, in a household, right, where you said there was like quite a few people and they were always like leaving and like departing on their journey. Did that play a part in like not feeling a part of, or was that like kind of like a starting point for like kind of those kind of feelings?
You should ask my therapist. Like they probably would be able to answer that question a lot more honestly than I am. I mean, I believe so, right? Like, you think about the like quote unquote typical household. It's like, it's you and your parents and like you're there and it's always the same people, right? But like, when I'm 6 and 7, I have this person that's taking me to school in the morning and then tucking me into bed at night or making me eat dinner or giving me rides or whatever. And then all of a sudden they just like leave and I just don't talk to them ever again, right? The other thing was they all spoke their native language in the home. And my parents didn't teach me their native language growing up because they were like, oh, we know, like the thinking back then, and I guess this happens with a lot of first generation Americans, is if you teach the child the native language and they know English at the same time, it confuses them and it makes them not do as well in school. And like my parents were super like adamant about education. And so they didn't teach me Amharic is the name of the language, right? And so I'm in the house and we're all eating dinner or whatever, and there's a conversation that's happening, but it's happening in a language that I don't know. And so I'm in my own head, kind of just having a dialogue with myself at that time, right? And so I think it led to like this. I have like an avoidant attachment style, right? So like I get close enough to people until like I feel like there's an attachment, and then I'm like, whoa, hold on, relax, right? Because like I have this automatic response system that tells me that depending on other people is dangerous because they're going to leave or whatever, right? And I do think a lot of that comes from childhood, right? They're like the survival mechanisms for a 7, 8, 9-year-old to be okay when the person he was attached to leaves and you don't see them again, right? Or I can like stand the conversation happening. I don't think like people understand how much they pick up from conversations as a third party, right? Just like sitting there and listening to other people talk, right? And so like I have found that I feel like my level of emotional feeling is significantly less than like normal people. And so like I'm doing this like somatic experiencing thing right now, which is very awkward. And most of the time I'm just like, am I doing this right? And my therapist continuously reminds me that I'm doing it right. But like I experience that in my head. What is that? What is what?
Like what you're working through. I've never heard of it.
So somatic experiencing is like so there's this like theory or concept that your body stores trauma, right? And so what somatic experiencing is similar to like EMDR, where you're trying to like reprocess all that trauma, but it's all based on like feeling. So when you're thinking about a memory or thinking about something, you have like bodily reactions to it. You might like warm up a little bit. You might feel a twitch somewhere. You might feel like butterflies in your stomach. And so it's really just a matter of like being aware of it. And then like part of the process is like leaning into it and then going away from it, and leaning into it and then going away from it. Because like what happens is I develop this like automatic response of when I start to feel feelings, I completely ignore them and shut them out, because that's the place that's safe, right? And that's what my life had been for however many years. And so now I'm trying to like coach my brain, be like, hey, no, man, like feel the feeling. It's okay. And like, you should sit with this. And yeah, man, for someone who's like hyper logical, it's weird. Right. Yeah, it's absolutely weird. But like, I don't know, man. Like I said, I'm in the process of like growing, right? And this is just like the next avenue of what that growth looks like, I guess.
That's what's up. We're constantly growing, constantly evolving.
Yeah, trying to, man. I don't know.
Not running from drugs and alcohol, just growing towards a better life.
Yeah, because like the reality is like if drugs and alcohol, like if passing a drug test was the only thing, I'd miss so much, right? Like I've been able to pass a drug test for 11 years. I am significantly better in terms of like how I would measure my quality of life today than 11 years ago. The drugs and alcohol didn't change at all. But what changed is all of this stuff like in here and like in here, you know? And so like that's a constant process, right? There's still like times where I feel, I don't know, like, I don't know if depressed is the right word, even though I got diagnosed with depression last year. Anxiety was a big one. But it's like constant growth, right? Like constant seeking of whatever is out there.
Love that, man. Also, wouldn't be the Otter God Pod if we didn't ask God shots, man. You shared a couple in the notes there. Why don't we walk through that?
Yeah, I got there's like 3 that are top of mind to me. And so if I forget them,
are they in order of importance? You should do them in order. Do third, second, and then first.
No? I don't know if I can put them in order of importance because they all were like super important. So I'm going to do them in like chronological. Okay. So these are your cues in case I forget. Hotel Cigar California.
Hotel Cigar California.
Yeah. So
sounds like an Eagles song.
Right. So the first one is I kind of talked about it. I talked about it a little bit was when I went to go pick up the Xanax and Percocet so I could overdose. And I take 2 steps out of that Motel 6 room and I get a call from someone I hadn't talked to him in 6 months. I haven't had Xanax in my possession for a year. And he's like, hey man, do you have any Xanax on you? And so like one of the personas that I took on when I was in college was drug dealer, because like it gave me power and value and I could provide you something you needed, right? I had some status, like all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, like if you think about it logically, right? Logically, I'm like, hey, if I take 1,000 milligrams of this thing, I will accomplish my goal of ending my life. So I bought 1,000 milligrams. And then if someone was like, hey man, do you want to sell half of them? Like, what am I going to do with the money?
Right.
Like, I can't take it with me.
Your plan is to leave.
Yeah. I'm like, no, I actually should be trying to acquire more, right? But I don't. And so I end up selling it to them. And I'm talking to someone like a couple years later, and they were like, man, that's crazy that God came to you in a drug deal. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? He was like, how else do you explain someone reaching out to you in the moment you felt the most valueless with the only thing that provides you value, which is your ability to sell drugs to somebody else? And I was like, holy crap. Like, I thought about, like, if he would have called me a day before, a day after, right? Like, I might not be here. And so, like, so the Celestine Prophecy, the first principle in that, it's like a 12 principle book. The first principle in that book is talking about coincidences that are a little bit too neat to be like, oh man, that was just random. And it's like, that's how I've experienced God shots, right? So that was one. Another one happened when I was like 4 years sober, and like, I wasn't doing all the things that I did when I first got sober, right? So I have a wedding rehearsal that I'm going to go to after work that day. And so I leave work at like 12 that day. I leave early. The wedding rehearsal's at like 4. And so if you picture like a map, I work here in this part of the city. The wedding rehearsal is like here in this part of the city, and I live like over here in this part of the city, right? And so I'm leaving work, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to go grab some cigars for the rehearsal dinner so we can smoke it after. And then on the way to the cigar bar, I'm like, man, if I feel like having a drink while I come up here, I'm going to have a drink. I'm not going to stop myself, right? Like, I'm not going to go there intending to drink on purpose, but if I'm sitting there smoking a cigar and I feel like having a drink, I'm not going to stop myself, right? Like, that's the fucking line that I'm telling myself. And so I go to this cigar bar that's like way up here, right? It's like, it's out of the way of everybody, because I was like, I don't want to run into anybody I know. Like, and so I pull up to this cigar bar, and it's like 3:45 or whatever. And then I'm like fiddling with something like my phone or something after like I park, and I open my door and I'm fiddling with something. And then I hear this voice and it says, is that Danny?
No.
And I'm just like, who the hell is here right now? Like, I came here specifically so I wouldn't run into anybody.
You went way out of the way.
Way out of the way, right? And so I look up, it's my sponsor. What? And my sponsor works down here, and he lives way over here.
And he's up here.
And he's way up here. And I look up, I'm like, what are you doing here? And he's just like, well, once a month, me and some guys from work come to this cigar bar and smoke cigars. They all bailed today, but I figured I would come anyways. And so I showed up.
No.
Right? And like, all of the different things, right? If I would have left work 30 minutes earlier, if he would have hit one more red light, if the wedding rehearsal was on a different day, if he decided not to go because everybody else bailed, right? What happens that day? Like, maybe I start a run, you know? But instead, I sit there, I smoke a cigar with him, we have a conversation, I tell him where I'm at, and I get back like plugged in, right? And I get back into my car and I like look up and I'm just like, okay, right?
Wow.
And so there was that one. There was one when I was like 8, 9 years sober, 10. I go to this conference in California. It's a marketing conference. And like, work conferences are really like just excuses to get drunk and sell people stuff, right? That's really all it is.
That's when I went out this last time, was at a work conference.
Oh, really? So yeah, you know, right? Exactly. It's like super like booze, company car.
It's just this big networking event where it's just like, hey, after we leave the conference, we're just gonna go get drinks at this place. You should go.
And like, people are awkward, so everyone's like, oh, alcohol. You guys will talk to each other now, right? Like, alcohol has a purpose in like broader society.
Yeah, it's like I'm not gonna answer your call when you try to like hit me up to network after this, unless we go out and have drinks and like build that rapport.
Yeah, but if we have drinks, like social lubricant, like, all right, cool, we can all have conversations with whoever, right? And it's like, that's what conferences are. So I go to this conference and I'm in California and like, I'm good. And then I get an email the day before from somebody, and he was like, hey, because like the attendee list was public. He's like, hey, I saw you're the only person from your company coming to this conference. We're going to have dinner at the hotel restaurant, a group of us, no strings attached, just didn't want you to fly solo while you're here. I was like, oh, that's nice of him. I'm probably not going to go, but that's nice of him to invite me. I don't really want to do things with people I don't know. I'll just hang out in my room. And so like, the day comes, and you know, it's like dinner was supposed to be at 6. It's like 5:45. I'm laying in my bed in the hotel room. And I'm sitting there, I was like, man, you know what? Screw it. I'll go down there and I'll have some food, right? And I'm sitting there, and like we get to the like lobby for waiting, and everyone's like, "Oh, let's run up a massive bar tab, and it's on the company, and yeah, it's a round of shots, and let's drink, baby." And like so we go sit down, right? And I'm like, "Yeah, you know, just playing the part, like, yeah, let's do it." And we sit down, and my head starts going like, "Man, I'm in California. I've been sober like a decade. I could probably have a drink tonight and be okay, and nobody will know. Like it'll be fine." And then like the other voice in my head is like, "That's a pretty dumb thing that you're thinking right now. Like you have this conversation with people on a regular basis. You know that's not going to end well. You know it won't just be one. You'll probably get blacked out." And so like I'm having that debate in my head, and then I'm like, "Man, I should look up a meeting to go to." And I start like looking up a meeting that I can go to that night. And the waitress is going around taking orders, and it's like, "Oh, rum and coke and whatever fruity drink you got," and blah blah blah. The guy that invited me, who started the whole "let's run up a massive bar tab" conversation, he's like, "I'll get a soda water." And I look up and I'm just like, "You were just talking about bar tab. Run it up. Run a soda water. What?" And so I'm like, "Yeah, I'll take a soda water and a cranberry juice." And so I find this meeting that I'm going to go to, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." And I'm like, "Hey, I got to meet some friends here. I got to cut out of dinner a little bit early. Just wanted to give you guys a heads up. I don't want to be rude." He's like, "All right, cool, no big deal." So we start talking. And we're talking about like work stuff, and there's like phrases that you hear if you're in the rooms, you know what I mean? That like
you can tell. It's like if you know, you know.
Yeah, it's like those like key phrases, you know. And so like we're sitting there, we're eating, we're talking about. He works for some company that does some tracking or whatever, and he's like, "Yeah, man, that feature was supposed to be out in Q1, but we had to push it back to the second half of this year. But you know what they say, man, progress not perfection." And like I'm eating,
and
like he says progress not perfection. I'm just like, what? And like I look up and I'm just like, okay, I know that. All right, I heard that. I have never heard anyone say the words progress not perfection unless they were in the rooms.
Right.
Like nobody randomly strings those
mixed
words together.
with the soda water with cranberry juice.
Right. And he's got like sleeves, you know what I mean? Like it just looks like one of us. And so I'm like, all right, well, like I am also like, we'll call it manipulative, but I had to volley something back, right? And so, you know, we're sitting there talking about something, and I go like, "Yeah, man, well, I don't know, man. One of my character defects is I think people are full of shit a lot of the times." And it's like, I got to throw the character defect out there, right? Yeah. And like, I see him do the same thing of like, he's eating and he like looks up and he's like, "Hold on, character defect, I know that." And so like I leave, or I'm like, "Oh, I got to go meet my friends, bye." So I end up going to this meeting out there. Dope meeting, it was cool, had a great time. Get back, I run into him in the like hotel hallways or whatever afterwards. And so we have this conversation. "Thanks for coming out to dinner. Oh, thanks for the invite, yada, yada. Hey, by the way, noticed you said X, Y, and Z. Are you a friend of Bill?" And turns out this dude had been sober for 8 years out of like Austin, Texas, right? And so like, you think about what are the odds, right? What are the odds that there's like 300-400 people at this conference? The guy that reaches out to me randomly out of all the other attendees is another person who's sober. And we happen to be having dinner together when I'm having these thoughts of like, can I not? Maybe, maybe not. Right. And it's just like, man, all right, I see it. Right. And I know I said there was 3, but there's one other one because this was just like wild. I was
bonus gotcha.
Bonus gotcha.
No.
This one was wild. So like I'm sitting, there's a retreat that happens, right? In Prescott or Payson or one of those northern cities. And so we're in these cabins and like I'm a
work retreat? Or?
No, recovery retreat.
Recovery.
Yeah. And so I'm like the opening main speaker on one of the nights, right? And so we're in there and we're in this like hall. It's I forget the name of the campground, but it's one of those religious ones. And so we're in this hall and there's like, we're standing in front of the fireplace. That's where the speakers thing is. And there's this like balloon archway that's right there. And this room's like full of people and stuff. And so I'm pitching, right? And I'm sharing my story. And I get to this part that I've like started to say pretty regularly, which is how when I first started praying, I didn't think God existed, right? Like my sponsor was just like, "Hey man, in the morning, say, God, please keep me sober. At the end of the day, say, God, thank you for keeping me sober." And that's it. And then like a week after that, he calls me and he's like, "How's the prayers going?" I was like, "Listen, man, I'm talking to nothing." And he's like, "Cool, keep talking to nothing." I was like, "All right, I guess I'll keep talking to nothing." And then I would do that a little bit more. And then over a period of time, it was like the same thing that I was doing in that room. Like I'm talking, I know other people can hear me, even if they're not talking back. I just have this awareness and knowing that I'm not talking to a wall. I'm talking to, like right now, I'm talking and I know you can hear me even if you don't say anything, right? And that was my experience with God. And then after a period of time, there was like these experiences that were too neat to be explained with random happenstance. And literally, I'm sharing that at the podium. And literally, as those words are leaving my mouth, the balloon archway that's behind me falls and like hits me. And I see a cross on the actual like fireplace. Sorry, I got witnesses for this one, dude. And I'm sitting there and like I look back at the people and I look back at the people and I'm just like,
God.
All right, man, I guess like if you want to show off, that's cool. Like I see you, right? And it's like that, those type of things are like, man, that's like the wildest experience I've had. Like the timing of that was insane. And so like, yeah, man, like I had a lot of prejudice against that word God. It came with a lot of connotations of this is the right God and we'll kill you if you believe a different God and all this kind of stuff. Like God is this specific thing. And so what happened was I kind of just like got comfortable with not knowing, right? Like if you ask me like define God, I'd be like, right? I don't know, but I'm okay with the I don't know. And I continuously try to have experiences that make me feel close. It's one of those things where I can feel it better than I can explain it. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. The balloon arch? That's good
that was
stuff, man.
Wild, bro.
That's so good. I feel like I get so hyped when I listen to people's God shots because it's like, how do you explain that? Like, you really, like, you can't.
I low-key, I wanted to put together like a book or something one day that just had a list of all the, because like you listen to enough people talk and you hear some amazing ones, you know?
Right.
And
yeah,
so,
and then that's like literally what we named the podcast after. It's like, is it odd or is it God? You know what I mean? It's just like, do you really think that that specific circumstance happened in such a meticulous way to like give that outcome randomly?
Right.
Or do you believe that like God, a power greater than yourself, orchestrated that to show you something, reveal something to you?
Yeah. Yeah, like I feel like I've mentioned a lot of times, it's like the more logical explanation is a God. That's the more logical explanation.
It's just like, I'm just going to break it real simple for you.
Yeah.
It was God.
Yeah.
That's amazing, man.
I
love that. That was so cool.
Oh, yeah.
The craziest thing is like the work conference. I wish like somebody would have just hit me up at that work conference, because what happened for me was I took the drink, ensued to get blackout, it caused a huge problem with my boss and everybody else at the networking event, and it wasn't great. So
how long were you sober at this point?
This time around?
When you were at the conference?
About 2 years.
Okay. Was there any like dis-ease or like feeling of like, oh, this isn't exactly smart and I don't necessarily want to do? What was that like?
Dude, it was like, so leading up to it, bro, it was like, so I'm at this conference all day and my company is hosting this networking event, open bar at like this like super like posh like uptown spot like in downtown San Francisco, and it's like they're pushing it on all the clients like, hey, like open bar, like we want you guys here, we're doing this huge event. And like I was like part of the team that left the conference a little bit early, so I go like help set up and like make sure everything is good. And while I'm there, they say, hey, like since you guys are here, like why don't we like to have a round like before everyone like gets here for like helping out or whatever. And I denied that round. So like that, like I was just like, no, like this isn't good. But then like the network events like in full effect, dude, and like my coworkers, like my boss, like everyone knows I'm sober, right? And like, but this entire time, like I start becoming more and more uncomfortable. Like I start feeling more and more out of place. I'm like not okay with myself, and like, and at that point, like I like come from like a sales background, right? And like I'm just thinking in my head, like all these guys are building connections with these people. They're gonna have a way stronger pipeline than me, and like all these things are like going through my head. And I just remember, like it was like, everything in me was just like, don't do this, don't throw it away. And I just walk up to the bar and like order a drink. And I remember as soon as like I like put it to my lips, that sense of ease and comfort just didn't happen. And I'm like, it's not working. So I'm like, drink again. And I'm just like, and I just go down this like rabbit hole of like chasing that feeling that I thought it was going to give me. And it just compiled all of the anxieties and the fears and everything that I was experiencing into just like this mess of a problem. And like, now I'm just like completely out of control, like freaking out. And they're like, hey man, just go back to the hotel. And I'm like crying, dude. And it was just, it was such like a horrible experience. And then like coming back from that, like it just set off like a 9-month span of just trying to like find that ease and comfort and never actually obtaining it. And yeah, it wasn't until I was pretty much just like on my last legs and like just I knew I had to like come back and like just get reconnected to God. And like that, I like was thoroughly convinced at that point in my life that the only thing that's going to rid me of that internal discomfort, like the only thing that's like going to restore me back to that sanity of being okay with myself, being at ease with myself, like was regaining that connection with God and like and becoming sober again. But it was not great, man. It's like when you're feeling that uncomfortable and the one thing for so many years of your life that gave you that ease and comfort doesn't work. You know? Yeah,
it's a rough place to be. It's kind of wild how sometimes you can like watch yourself go. Like I imagine you probably like watched yourself walk up to the bar and like party was like, this is not smart, don't do this. And the other party of you was just like on autopilot going and doing it. And you're kind of like watching yourself go through that motion.
It's like I transcended that moment and like in like real time was just like watching like the start to like my demise. It was like, it's like that scene from Interstellar where he's like banging on the window. He's like, no. Like that's like today me like looking back, like don't do it. And it was that was an experience, you know, and like, you know, I beat myself up for it for like months after that, and like, and then things like it affected my work performance, and ended up just like leaving to go to a different place because they have better opportunities. But it's like I don't think I ever like fully like processed or recovered from that. But
was it harder to build that connection back the second time around?
No, I think it was easy. Like my whole thing was like when I first went to treatment, like I got 2 years of sobriety my first like try. And I feel like that diluted me into like increasingly like going to these meetings, and I'm hearing relapse is a part of my story, relapse is a part of my story, and all these cautionary tales and them not relating to my story. And I started about like maybe the 18-month mark, starting instead of finding the similarities, was just focusing on the fact that it was just like, well, the book says like I could just be a hard drinker, or maybe I'm just this, and maybe all of these consequences that I suffered before were sufficient enough for me to stop because relapse isn't part of my story. And like going into that conference already like a junior account executive, like have something to prove, all this pressure, and then being in that circumstance, also in that headspace of like not thoroughly convinced that I am an alcoholic, like it all came to a head into this like glorious like moment of just straight like losing my shit like in the middle of like a networking event. And like looking back on it, like it was like that was just how it had to be, because when I came back this time, it was like I no longer needed to do more research. Like I was thoroughly convinced that what that feeling that I was chasing wasn't there for me anymore. And it was just like I had 9 months of just constantly like trying until I eventually realized that it's like it's never gonna be what I make it out to be in my head.
Yeah, it's kind of wild, like when you realize that the negative things that happen in your life, or the things that you perceive as negative things that happen in your life, are actually positives, right? You're like, oh, like, hey, relapsing after 2 years and going out for 9 months, that sounds like, oh, that would be a bad thing.
Right.
But it's like you just said, oh, I needed that to happen for me to be able to do this today. And it's like, oh, maybe the bad thing was a good thing actually, right? Like I think that's the wildest experience for me.
Like exactly like you said, like I truly believe that's like if that wasn't part of my story, like I wouldn't have like the relationship with God that I have today. I like wouldn't like be as active in the program and like be able to like do all the things that I do today, like even stuff like this, like I wouldn't, because it's like there would always be that like barrier between like me and like truly like understanding that like to my core, like if I'm not consistently living on a spiritual basis and helping others and like doing all these things that I was taught to do, like I'm going to start feeling more and more out of place, more and more uncomfortable in my own skin. And those internal discomforts are the things that are going to take me back to external validation. It's wild. Man.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect summary. Man.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience at like 8 years sober of like this negative thing turning into, like it felt like it was negative in the time, and it turned out to be the best possible thing for me.
Walk us through that.
Well, so like I'm 8 years sober or whatever, and I have this job opportunity come up that I'm interviewing for, and I'm like, dude, I am praying that I get this job. It's going to be like the first time I make 6 figures, and I'm going to be traveling overseas, and all this status comes with it, and like I can't wait to tell my dad because my dad's going to be proud of me, like all this kind of stuff. I'm like legitimately like, God, please let me get this job, right? And I do, right? I do. And part of the job was I had to move to Atlanta. Right? I was like, all right, cool. I'll move to Atlanta. I have nothing keeping me here. I even like said goodbye to people. I was like this close to planning a going away party. I just needed to know what date I was going to leave by, right? And so like the date keeps getting pushed back, and finally they're like, all right, hey, January, first week of January, that's when you're going to move. So you can start in the office here. And I started in August. You can start in the office here, and then in January you're going to move. I'm like, all right, cool. And so I start working, and maybe 6 weeks into it, I wake up one day and I'm just like, I'm miserable. It's the first thing I think about when I wake up. It's the last thing I think about when I go to sleep. It's dominating my mental space 24/7. I feel out of place. I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. I feel like I'm failing, and I don't even know what I need to do in order to start succeeding. Right? Like it felt like I felt when I was getting loaded, right? I was a slave to this thing now. And it sucked so much. It sucked out on like a level 10, right? And it sucked so much I had to do the thing that I never wanted to do, which was I had to admit defeat and admit failure. And so I ended up quitting in like October, November. And I get a different job here, and I take a pay cut and whatever. So I quit that job in November. And if I didn't quit, I would have moved to Atlanta in January of 2020. And then in March of 2020, the entire world shuts down. And so I would have been in a new city, knowing nobody, locked up and with no opportunity to meet anyone, right? I would have went insane, right? And so like, you know, if the job sucked at a 6, I would have toughed it out, and I would have gone there. And I would have went through that experience. But instead, it sucked at a 10, so much so that I ended up quitting, staying here. COVID happens, and I'm home. I'm just like with my family and friends, right?
Wow.
And so it's like, is it a bad thing or a good thing that job sucks so much?
Right.
Like I'm grateful that it sucked at a 10 instead of sucking at a 6.
Right. And like the cool thing too about like working a program, like being in recovery, is like you can almost like separate like the objective from the subjective, and like simply just like look at things as just like those were just like that's just what happened. It's like it's not even necessarily like it was negative or positive. It's like, you know, like I can perceive it as that, but it's just like I can just look back and be like, that's just what happened.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like it's so crazy.
You ever heard
like,
the story about the farmer and the farmer and the horse and the sun and the war?
No.
I can't tell it, or else like I
so you
I teed it out.
Like, have you ever heard of this
Google
story?
it,
And then you're like me either.
No, there's a podcast where Shia LaBeouf talks about it, but like Google, I don't know what it's called. It's amazing. It's like one of the best analogies.
It's crazy you mentioned that, because it's like the ongoing theme with me and Carlos is it's like eventually this podcast like in my head's gonna blow up and we're gonna have Shia LaBeouf on it, and like that's when I'm gonna know we made it.
Yeah.
Like, it's like that's like the main goal.
Maybe
like,
he can tell the story on the podcast.
Maybe one day, like years from now, when we're like just bosses on YouTube and Shia's here, I'm gonna be like, actually, I'm gonna play him this clip.
Yeah, like just like tee it up. Like, all right, here you go. Tell us the horse farmer war kid story.
Yeah.
It's a great story.
That's so awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's really cool, man. And you got like a lot of really good things to say. And I did want to like ask this because this is like another one of my favorite parts of the podcast. Like if you could go back to 23-year-old you, right, who's like picking up that phone, trying to call Promise to Pay Sober Livings, not knowing if it was going to be okay or not, like what would you tell that guy?
It's all worth it. It's all worth it. All of the pain, the misery, the suffering, the pain, the despair, the hopelessness. It's all worth it in the end, because you're going to have an opportunity to be the hope for a bunch of other people who are in a similar situation. And your life will be unrecognizably better than it is today. It's all worth it. Live the experience.
Love that. I don't even know what to say. How can you follow that up? That was pretty good.
No. Yeah. So I have the suicide note that I wrote before I got sober.
Right. And, you kept it.
Yeah, I kept it. It's like this flimsy.
How often do you where do you keep it? This is like something that like you like look at every day, or
no, not every day.
That'd be kind of morbid.
That'd be a lot. It's in the nightstand next to my bed, just because like I know that I won't lose it if it's in the nightstand next to my bed. But I read it at least once every year, which is like right around my sobriety date. And then sometimes I'll read it like if I'm sharing at a meeting or something like that. But yeah, I read it like at least once a year around my sobriety date. And when I got 10 years, I wrote a letter back, right, to that person. So it's kind of like similar to that question, which was like, here's what life looks like today, right, and how different it is, right? And so, yeah, I don't know, it's just cool to, because like it's hard to remember, honestly, right? Like people be like, oh, I remember exactly, like, no, you don't. No. It's hard to remember that, right? You know, and so like, yeah, it's just like cool
so much happens in like life where it's just like if you don't like have like accurate documentation or like certain situations, like you just really don't remember in fullness like exactly how it went down.
Yeah, so life gaslights me.
Yeah.
So
100%. Life gets lifey.
Yeah, for sure.
That's so awesome, man. Well, I mean, I appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah.
Real quick, just because we have to, you know what time it is. Shout out to the sponsor, Plugged In Recovery. If you or somebody you love are looking for sober living, give Wade a call, 612-505-5494, or visit www.azsober.com. Danny, thank you so much for stopping by, bro.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was great.
Appreciate it.
That was awesome. Here's another thing. Anecdote. An anecdote.
That's a word.
Yep. Sorry. An anecdote to this whole ordeal. It's like cool because it's like I've seen Danny around like pretty much the entire time since I like moved back to the Valley and like recovery, and I've never actually like gotten a chance to like kind of like chat it up with you and stuff. So it's like super cool that like this was like almost like what you guys are seeing right now was like my actual experience with things as well, because I didn't know very much about his story or whatever. So that was awesome, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm kind of envious of your position because we meet a ton of people, and now you have an opportunity to just like get to know people on a more intimate level.
It's kind of cool. It's just like, yeah, now I can just like reach out to everybody in the community and like all these different like cliques and circles in different parts of the Valley and just like learn about them on a platform where like other people can learn about them. Yeah. It's been super cool experience, and we appreciate you. I mean, you joined us. We're literally on like metal folding chairs right now. Like if you guys could see, there's like no furniture in the house that we're in right now. But hopefully when the podcast grows and we get more established, like we can maybe have you back on. And
yeah, have me back on when you guys have massage chairs.
I'll put a word in with Plugged In and tell them we got to put an order to American Furniture or something. But no, this has been super great, man. We appreciate it. Guys, just make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also at Otter God Pod on all social media platforms, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We appreciate it. We're at 20 subscribers on YouTube. What? So now we're going to 30. The road to 30 starts today. Don't be shy. Subscribe. Thank you guys. We'll see you next week.